Hey everybody, it's Jim from Cigars. This video is going to go over all the different shapes and sizes of cigars, and there's a lot of them, and some of them are pretty crazy. I took kind of a flyer and bought this box for demonstration purposes for this video, and it's called Diesel Sideshow. And this is pretty interesting. This is a limited release that they come out with only once a year, and I think it's mid-year, and it's really a nice presentation. I don't know if I'd recommend this. It's about $99. I don't know if I'd recommend this for something to buy for oneself. But if you have a cigar smoker in your life, sort of the cigar smoker who has everything, this would be a really interesting gift for them because it's really a good representation of different shapes. And also diesels, if you haven't had them or aren't familiar with them, are a pretty good cigar. When you walk through your local cigar shop or when you look at cigars online, man, there's a dizzying array of different shapes and sizes of cigars. It's complicated by the fact that some manufacturers don't even use the standard size description like Toro or Robusto. They decide to call it an Imperial. That's what Ashton does for one size of their cigar, or Monarch or something like that. And even Padron does for their standard Padron line. They use numbers in the thousands, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, and so forth. Manufacturers will also play fast and loose with the description, and they'll take a standard size like Robusto and call something a Grand Robusto or a Double Robusto or something like that, which really have no meaning. Anyway, the purpose of this video is to sort through all that stuff, and it really isn't as complicated as they make it out to be. So we'll untangle that and make it easy to understand sizes and shapes of cigars. First thing we need to do is we're going to divide all cigars, all handmade cigars, into just two categories. Parejos, which are straight up and down, straight from the foot up to the head, and figurados, which are curved. And you can have a lot of different shapes of figurados. We'll get into that. The standard starting point in terms of size for all cigars is the Cuban Corona. The standard Cuban Corona size is 5 5/8 inches by 42 gauge. The main reason why we use Corona as a starting point when we talk about size is that's the old style cigars that were rolled in Cuba and are still a very popular size in Cuba today. So we take the Corona size and we start to build off that. A petite Corona is a little bit shorter. Instead of over 5 inches, it might be 4.5 inches, and a tiny bit skinnier, maybe 40 gauge. So you can see where we're going with this. We take that standard size and we can do a bunch of stuff with it. We can even go up to what's called a Grand Corona, which is what we call a Churchill, which is like 7 inches by about 47 gauge. The most common shape and size cigars in the US market are Robustos and Toros. Between those two, they actually sell about 50% of all the cigars in the US. The standard size Robusto, and there's some variations on this, plus or minus a quarter of an inch, but the standard Robusto size is 5 inches by 50 gauge. So that's kind of easy to remember, 5 by 50. And the Toro is a little bit bigger than that. The standard Toro size is 6 inches by 52 gauge. So a little bit longer and a little bit fatter than the Robusto size. Now let's increase the size even more and look at Grandes. And I'll hold this up next to basically what's a Toro. And you can see that that's quite a difference in girth for the Grande size. Grandes are also called Gordos. And the standard size for a Grande, again, plus or minus a little bit, is 6 inches by 60 gauge. There are actually some Gordo cigars, not very many, that go up to 70 or 80 gauge. Gordos are relatively new. They've only been around about 15 or 20 years, but they've gotten extremely popular. They aren't up there with the Robusto or the Toro size yet, but they're growing in popularity every year. On the opposite side of the coin are longer, thinner cigars like Panatellas and Lanceros in Lonsdale cigars. Those have actually decreased in popularity in recent years. I think I saw a number where they're about 7% market share of all the cigars in the US are those longer, thinner cigars. They can range in size from about 6 inches up to 8 inches or even more than that. And they're generally 38 gauge, so they're pretty thin, on up to maybe 45, 44, 45 gauge. All right, let's move on to figurados. And figurados is a broad category that encompasses any cigar that isn't straight. Probably the most common term you hear in figurados is pyramid. And a pyramid is straight up and down except when it gets to about within an inch of the head, and then it kind of angles up to a point. If the point is really sharp, sometimes they call it a torpedo, but torpedo is not really a term that has a specific definition. There's also something called a short pyramid. There's a regular pyramid cigar is about 6 or 6.5 inches long and about 52 gauge, so they're pretty good size. A short pyramid would be about 48 to 50 gauge and maybe 4.5 to 5 inches long. A very popular form of figurados is a perfecto. A perfecto is a figurado that's tapered at both ends instead of just one end. Common examples of that, La Aurora out of the Dominican Republic makes some perfectos that are very popular. And also Fuentes Hemingway series would be considered perfectos. But there's a lot of them on the market if you look around. One specific kind of perfecto is called a diadema. And a diadema simply means a very large perfecto. It might be about 50 gauge or even 52 gauge by about 8 inches long. So it's a very large and long perfecto. So we've nailed about 99.9% of all the cigars sold. And I hope you saw it. It really isn't as complicated as they make it out to be. So now you know those terms and know that they're important. They might be affecting the taste and smoking experience of a cigar. Hope you got something out of this video. I will see you next time from Cigars, Cigars, Cigars.